us this evening for our annual partnership with ASHRAE-St. Louis. I'd like to share a few announcements before we get started with this evening's presentation. First, thank you so much to our sponsor, CXE Group. We really appreciate their support this evening, especially since we don't have the opportunity to connect with them during networking like we would in person. Our board just opened nominations for at-large board positions in 2021. You can visit our website for more information, but nominations are due September the 4th and start on January the 1st, 2021. And since it's time to start talking about 2021 already, we also currently have a call for proposals open for 2021 educational programs. Proposals are due August the 17th. If you have a good sustainability to share, consider submitting a proposal. We definitely love highlighting local success stories. This week, we also announced a reimagined Green Schools Quest for the 2020-2021 school year, adapting to conditions related to COVID-19. We still want to support schools in their sustainability efforts and pair them with mentors. So this year we will be providing participating schools and mentors with monthly challenges. And we're also shifting away from our formal judging, and schools will be entered into drawings for cash prizes for participating. So to learn more about that, visit www.greenschoolsquest.org. And finally, I want to just say that we have a lot going on this summer. Tonight's speaker will be back for a virtual in-depth session next Tuesday, which is August the 18th, on the BIT building program. We also are launching a Q&A session in partnership with the City of St. Louis on their Building Energy Performance Standard. And we have a coffee break next Friday, August the 21st with Urban Harvest. Plus, be sure to mark your calendar for our next program on September the 8th, which is a town hall with USGBC's President and CEO, Mahesh Ramanujan. That's a tough one. So as you can see, we have a lot of activities going on, and so that means that we can all stay pretty busy and engage with green buildings. At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Erin Black now. Erin is the president-elect of ASHRAE-St. Louis. She will share some announcements from ASHRAE and then introduce our speakers for tonight. So Erin?
Hi, for those of you that don't know me, I am Erin Black. As Angela stated, I am the president-elect this year for the ASHRAE-St. Louis chapter. That means I am also the programs director. So we are still in the process of getting those plans for this year. We do have a program coming up in September. We are going back to our second Monday of the month, as we do in September. Instead of it being a daytime meeting like our normal fall meetings, this one will actually be an evening meeting because this is a rescheduled TIGA Awards and Student Scholarship Night. Since COVID kind of put a damper on our schedule last spring, that is rescheduled from April. More details will be coming out shortly. And then we will move back to a daytime meeting for October. And we will, that will be October 12th, and that'll be a lunchtime meeting, even though I'm sorry we have not figured out how to serve lunch virtually. And that will be our annual membership promotion meeting. Stay tuned for details. You'll be getting them via email as you have in the past. That's pretty much it for the ASHRAE announcements. If you have any questions about programs this year, please give me, send me an email. It is listed on the ASHRAE-St. Louis chapter website. We are anticipating doing virtual meetings at least through the end of the year and possibly into 2021. It depends what happens with the virus. Also, just like something that makes us feel like we're more together If you're able, we would highly recommend that you turn on your camera for tonight's meeting, just so that we can see your face, because we miss you. Speaking of missing you, but we will now move on to our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Jenny Carney. She is a Vice President at WSP and Sustainability, Energy, and Climate Change Practice Leader. She is a LEED Fellow. She's been working in the realm of sustainability in the built environment since 2004, pivoting from her early work as a field ecologist. Jenny oversees WSP project work related to enhancing the performance of real estate portfolios, including performance-based benchmarking, sustainability programming and reporting, building occupants, and operator engagement. Please help me welcome Jenny Carney.
Great, thank you so much. I am sorry that we're not together in person, but now that we're all acclimated to the virtual world, hopefully we can have a good conversation about tonight's topic, energy efficiency measures with resiliency benefits. Before I dig in, is the screen share and audio coming through a-okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Everything looks great. Thanks,
Okay.
Jenny.
Okay. Yes, I'm with WSP, which, if you don't know, is a kind of engineering and technical services firm. I'm actually Chicago-based, though I have connections to St. Louis in that my mother-in-law lives there. So we had a nice idea that I'd come down for a visit and do this presentation. But in any case, I'm looking forward to sharing some of how my team and me have been thinking about integrating resiliency into our work, especially as it kind of aligns with energy efficiency in decarbonization of building portfolios. Within WSP, my team's sustainability, energy, and climate change works with a lot of corporate, municipal, higher education clients across their sustainability initiatives. And like mentioned, I focus particularly on real estate portfolios. I have a background in environmental science, so I'm not an MEP engineer, and I'm not a dedicated resiliency practitioner, of which there now are many people who have that credential and dedicated focus. But I do work with a lot of colleagues at WSP with those specific subject matter expertise. And as a company, we have increasingly been orienting ourselves towards our Future Ready initiative, which, you know, at its essence is sort of kind of looking towards the future in the world ahead and trying to figure out how to integrate the ideas of adaptation and increased physical and other risks from climate change into all of the different work we do. So I've been thinking a lot about this topic and exploring ways to bring resiliency into the mix. And I want to share some examples of that in terms of approach, as well as some of the data resources and tools that we've begun using. I'm sure many of the folks in the audience have also been taking steps down this road and would welcome via chat or otherwise other examples and tools that we can put on the table to help everybody sort of tiptoe down this progression of sustainability and efficiency towards resiliency. So for tonight, we'll spend a little time up front kind of going through resiliency defined, at least in the way that WSP and my colleagues have been thinking about it. Some of the particular threats that are most relevant to us in the Midwest. And then what's the sort of, what's out there in terms of analysis on efficiency measures that are most conducive or counter to resilience, and then pragmatically, how do you bring them into the mix of project planning and implementation? And that will segue into some of the tools, techniques, and other resources that at least I've found useful. Again, acknowledging that there's a lot of emergent activity in this arena, and as it goes from a conversation primarily at the policy perspective to the angle around investment and financial kind of risk assessment to infrastructure, to where I'm really spending my time, you know, in buildings, primarily existing buildings, and portfolios of buildings of all different ages and conditions. So with that, a little Resilience 101 conversation to start. So I think folks probably at this point have heard this term being bandied about for the last few years or so. But the way we think about it at WSP is taking into account some of the both chronic and gradual stressors that we face in terms of our systems, whether social or built environment or more broadly, as well as the acute and sudden shocks that are becoming more common and more intense. And the interplay between all of these stressors and shocks, and then how we can rearrange our approach to our work to really take into account those risks and translate them into adaptive planning in the various types of work. There's a lot of analysis that has come out on a national and international scale in terms of what our top global risks are. Many of them are directly linked to climate change in terms of being high likelihood. Those are the ones you see in the green on the top right. And then there's also the impact. So are they probable to happen? And then how dramatic is the effect on our current human systems? And, you know, a number of climate and sustainability related risks are both highly likely and highly impactful, meaning that folks like us have a long sort of runway of work to do in getting ready for these future and present day realities. A common definition of resilience is the capacity of systems of different types to learn, adapt, grow, and ultimately thrive, no matter what type level of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. Of course, 2020 is giving all of us a run for our money in terms of disruptions and shocks. So this is a you know, a challenging time, of course, but also I think a scenario of rich learning opportunity to see what aspects of our systems really have proven adaptable in these contexts and which are clearly lagging behind. Another way to think of it depicted in this graphic is when something pesky or problematic happens, an adverse event, does the functioning of the system, you can think of this at the building scale, just kind of have a permanent, like, lower level of function? Does it have a disruption to function and eventually it can kind of bounce back to previous state conditions? Or are the systems in place for there to be adaptation in the face of that adverse event that really repositions that system, that building, to be better than it was prior to the event? Now, that's pretty next level in terms of achieving resilience outcomes, but it does shift our thinking from disruption as something to just hustle back to the status quo towards thinking of disruption as an opportunity to layer in a higher and better functionality over time. In terms of how it fits into the realm of, you know, sustainability, green building, and so on, I find this this framing to be pretty useful, where resilience kind of owns the space or claims the space of adaptability absorbing shock, being flexible, and being well positioned for a changing future. Sustainability, which is of course related, and the two can work handily together, is more about getting our human systems back into balance and harmony with the environment. So when it comes to risks and extreme events, they both have a role to play, certainly, but they don't automatically align. And that's what we'll be talking more about specific to energy efficiency and other types of building efficiency. This is just one more way to kind of look at a progression down a pathway to heightened resiliency. There's many of these types of kind of frameworks and pathways that are taking shape, at least at a conceptual level. And in my experience, a lot of folks, especially as it applies to, building retrofits and continuous improvement, can make quite a bit of headway just by starting to step into the awareness category, where you're really mindful of near and midterm risks and incorporating those into how you're planning capital projects and so on. Over time, some amount of awareness and setting the stage for those transformations can position buildings to being in a better place to cope with adverse events and perhaps be ready for next gen economies and use of facilities and so on. A little history of the resilience movement. I didn't know this until one of my colleagues who specialize this filled me in, but it really has a kind of strong legacy in the crisis response and recovery industries, which are, of course, fairly reactive and fairly focused on rapidly building back to, a state that's similar to what was disrupted. And so resiliency is really an evolution of that type of disaster preparedness and recovery to being quite proactive in planning for and potentially sidestepping the devastating impacts of those types of crises. Now, specific to the Midwest, many of us have experienced firsthand, as recently as yesterday, some of the types of extreme weather and other risks that we face in our region. So Chicago was hit fairly badly by the derecho that swept through the Midwest yesterday with nearly hurricane force winds. Lots of downed trees and other types of damage that I'm sure we'll be taking stock of for the days ahead. But in terms of what the analysis more broadly says that we can expect in the Midwest, the biggest one probably, or at least a really important one, is a change in heavy participation. So this graphic, which is from Climate Science Special Report, shows by region which areas are going to see more kind of deluge rainfall events. And the upper Midwest, along with the Northeast, are in line to see a 40 to 50+% increase in the amount of extreme rainfall events. And what that means, is concerning for, infrastructure, but also at the individual asset level. Our understanding of what buildings and properties are at risk because of flooding really needs to be modernized. Some of you have maybe saw the coverage in June of this year from the New York Times about a new study that shows essentially that the official FEMA estimates for property at risk for flooding during a major storm are really kind of out of step with the current state and going forward reality. And Chicago in particular was cited in that coverage as a city with the biggest overall increase in the number of properties that are at higher risk than FEMA models show. Over 75,000 properties throughout Chicago were sort of newly designated as at risk via this new methodology. This work was driven by First Street, which has developed a flood factor tool that allows you to input any address in the US anyways, I'm not sure about internationally. It's kind of geared towards residential, but it works for commercial facilities as well. And it will give you a sense of your flood factor and how likely it is for a given property to be at increased risk of flooding. So I highly recommend plugging in your home address and bracing for the results. I'm pleased to report that my home and the WSP office in St. Louis both have minimal flood factor risk. So that's something. The implications though for this, when you think about insurance rates, asset value, as well as just getting ready for the potentiality that flooding actually hits your building, can be pretty daunting. And so for many folks who have properties that via this tool are newly showing as, you know, high risk, there's a lot of challenging decisions and financial implications that would need to be wrestled with. Back to my hometown of Chicago, the infrastructure aspects of dealing with the new world order around flooding are pretty substantial, and the city for many years has been trying to get ahead of antiquated combined storm and sewer systems. This project, which was recently completed a year or two ago, is actually quite near where I live in Chicago. And it's essentially a giant tunnel that was installed as a temporary holding for stormwater to prevent what had become really routine flooding for a lot of the buildings and households around the North Branch of the Chicago River. This, you know, I think the actual cost was over 70 million. That might have been an initial cost estimate. But these kinds of massive infrastructure costs are definitely showing up as increased costs to building operators in the form of escalating water and sewage rates, other types of taxation as municipalities need to raise the money necessary to deal with these levels of risk. Other types of things that we're increasingly likely to see in the Midwest, visits from our new friend, the polar vortex, which has been coming around semi-regularly in the winter with Arctic level air. And then kind of matched with the unfortunate pairing of the potential for extreme heat that is exacerbated by corn sweat, which is essentially the increased evapotranspiration that happens in the upper Midwest due to agricultural functions. So apparently Iowa can be more humid than Miami in the summer. So high heat plus high humidity definitely has a lot of human health effects and can be quite dangerous. And extreme heat is definitely something that is going to affect parts of the Midwest, including most of Missouri, in terms of an increase in the number of days each year above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. In Chicago, we have a sensitivity to extreme heat because of the devastating 1995 heat wave that claimed many hundreds of victims who died because of the heat wave. And there's been a number of kind of new, I guess, social and built environment evaluations of what contributed to those deaths during that event. And so two that I recommend checking out if you're interested is a movie called Cooked: Survival by Zip Code, as well as a book that was recently published by NYU sociologist Eric Kleinenberg, who also is originally from Chicago. They really examine what contributed to those deaths, both in terms of the building.
I'm coming.
Oh, sorry, somebody chimed in, but I'm not sure why. The deaths were distributed not equally throughout the city, but as the title of the movie suggests, there was really pockets of much more heavily impacted neighborhoods compared to other places around the city. And without giving too much away, building systems, public kind of safety issues, and then social infrastructure played a huge role in terms of who was at risk, who survived that event, and who unfortunately did not. So with that stage setting, I've been thinking a lot about how we can use our processes of continuous improvement and energy and other efficiency planning within buildings, building portfolios to introduce and improve the resiliency of those facilities over time as well. And, you know, I think that many folks are likely familiar with typical efficiency planning processes. So this has really, for me, been an examination of how best to tweak or modify those processes to layer in as much resiliency perspective and opportunity analysis as possible. And part of that is just kind of getting on the same page with dedicated resiliency practitioners about how they're thinking about doing these types of evaluations, planning, and project selection. So one of my teammates, Emily, who specializes in this work, she has this kind of resilience planning pathway that she uses to explain a process. And as I was looking at this, I thought it was suspiciously familiar to how you would go about an energy assessment and energy efficiency planning process, which tells me that there's some real opportunity here at the building level to try to merge these concepts and explore avenues to use capital dollars in a way that really optimizes both efficiency and resiliency. There's also been some interesting new research studies that have come out, and I expect that there will be many more of these going forward. And I think this is something that would be nice to increasingly build capability around specific to the Midwest and specific to practitioners like us across all of the facility types we deal with. But in any case, some of the dramatic kind of post-hurricane events that have happened in other areas have generated some scholarship and analysis that can be applied more broadly to other regions. And so the first example that I wanted to share in the associated study has to do with a nursing home that was affected by Hurricane Irma in 2017 in Hollywood, Florida. And this was a sort of tragic situation in which several of the kind of residents at the nursing home perished, not because of the immediate storm impacts, but because of loss of power at the facility and then kind of extreme heat in the aftermath of the initial impact of the hurricane. And in fact, some of the employees associated with that facility have actually faced charges related to the building failing, as well as the sort of human systems failing to create safe conditions for those residents. Hot off the presses is the study shown on the right from a variety of collaborators, including Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where they really did kind of a forensic analysis of what happened in that episode. And then they used kind of familiar modeling tools like Energy Plus simulations to evaluate what type of interventions might have been made to the facility that would have decreased the danger level and perhaps minimized or entirely reduced conditions that could lead to deaths. I recommend kind of grabbing a copy of this study if you're interested in giving it a careful read. I think it could be foundational to a lot of similar analysis and simulations. So in part, what they looked at was a variety of what they call passive measures, which really are about reducing kind of demand and solar heat gain, and active measures, which they're using to describe renewable energy generation and thermal storage. So focusing first on the passive measures, a lot of familiar seeming energy conservation measure type things with window shields, high emissivity roofing or roof coatings, reducing infiltration, adding insulation, optimizing the window coatings, using passive strategies like natural ventilation, and reducing light and other miscellaneous electric loads. And they lump these different interventions together in a variety of bundles and evaluated which of them contributed the most to shifting conditions at the building away from extreme danger or danger levels, which show up as red in the chart, towards, you know, caution in orange yellow categories, or safe, which would show as green if they'd achieved this. So, you know, one of the takeaways from this simulation exercise was, in this case, in Hollywood, Florida, with their local climate and sort of baseline code criteria for buildings, these interventions, when bundled together in the right way, could get the facility out of the sort of danger scenario towards something that was more in the caution range. But none of these really reduce risk altogether for a facility in this location experiencing conditions like the Hurricane Irma scenario. Another interesting thing about this study is that they tried to transpose this nursing facility to other locations to explore the effect of building codes and different climate and weather scenarios. So the two other study locales that they evaluated were San Francisco, California, and Chicago, Illinois. San Francisco, I didn't pull the charts for this presentation, but they were able to get more substantively into the green based on some of the favorable conditions there. And Chicago we'll take a closer look at. But the item that proved to have kind of a mixed impact was reducing infiltration. If you look to the far right of just the reduced infiltration measure relative to the baseline, it actually made the danger conditions worse in the Hollywood, Florida example. And that's because the mechanical HVAC systems failed. They were essentially without power. And when outdoor air temperatures were lower than indoor temperatures, the facility, when it had reduced infiltration in the simulation, it just made it more difficult to expel that excess heat. In other locations or other kind of scenarios where you don't lose HVAC power, infiltration may play out differently in terms of the benefits, but important to note that some ECMs can actually be counter to reducing risk in an extreme event, depending on a variety of interacting factors. Looking specifically to Chicago, which is the closest simulation to the St. Louis scenario, this synopsis actually shows a little worse overall than the Hollywood, Florida example, which I thought was sort of curious. And as I kind of dug in a little bit more to how they had shaped the study, there are a few things that were kind of important to note. They used current code as the setting for baseline conditions and evaluating improvements from baseline, which makes sense in a kind of energy plus style simulation. But it does limit the insights to how this would kind of play out in older buildings that were built to, all manner of evolving code criteria, or older buildings that still have a fair amount of passive functionality because they're so old that they predated, prevalent mechanical cooling and lighting and so on. So I think a big area of opportunity would be to bring this type of study into a broader array of building typologies of different eras. The other thing about their methodology is they added one day to the heat wave in the Chicago scenario. I'm not sure why exactly they did it, because it does kind of challenge an apples to apples comparison of that Hurricane Irma style event. And part of what we might be seeing here is just how much risk, how much danger increases as the duration of an extreme heat event persists. So that's certainly part of the story here that complicates a comparison across geographies. Two other things to point out as takeaways, at least from my perspective about this study, is that reducing infiltration, didn't necessarily contribute to the same bad effect in iterations that look at extreme cold, right? When you're trying to deal with the possibility of both extreme heat and extreme cold, as you would in the Midwest, you may need to think a little more carefully about the importance or the opportunities related to infiltration measures. And then lastly, taking a look at the active measures, which is the graph on the right of the screen, the scenarios that they looked at included having on-site generation that was equal to full power supply. So we'll say solar PV or something. Not surprising that if you have full capacity to do on-site generation and that system survives the storm, which was an assumption, that you'd be in pretty good shape in the aftermath. Half power supply, and even, I would imagine, a quarter power supply do a pretty significant job of getting away from the red and towards safe or caution levels. The other scenarios that they took a look at were what would happen if you had thermal storage capabilities at a building. And they looked at 8, 12, and 24-hour supplies, and you can see how all of those things play out. I think a high-level takeaway here is that by packaging what they considered a lot of low-cost or even operations measures, you can do a lot with efficiency to drive extreme heat resiliency. And if you're able to introduce power generation or advanced storage to a facility, you get much of the way to where you need to be to weather an event like these extreme examples. Another example that we can learn from is Hurricane Sandy in New York City. And this, of course, got a lot of post-hurricane aftermath scrutiny for effects on the built environment, just because of where it hit and how dense of an urban area this is. And there's two things that are kind of widely seen as critical building system failures that were widespread during this hurricane event. Backup generator failure and flood damage that affected MEP systems. And while we don't have hurricanes in the Midwest, I do think that the increased rainfall and derecho style events like yesterday's create similar conditions of high wind and potential for flooding. There's a variety of groups, including Urban Green, which is the USGBC kind of affiliate in New York City, that came out with recommendations for resilience in buildings. These go well beyond just energy efficiency related items shown in the graphic on the right, but a number of fairly kind of pragmatic building modifications that can be introduced to increase the chances of a building kind of succeeding in getting through an extreme weather event. And then lastly, for an example related to Hurricane Sandy, shortly thereafter, and this was in 2013, it's hard to believe 7 years have already passed, but so it is. Johnson Controls Institute for Building Efficiency conducted a survey of 600 plus energy and facility executives across North America, not just in New York City. And I would love for them to do a retrospective to see how realistic these responses have proved now that we're 7 years out. But in any case, they queried these executives about what types of initiatives they're currently doing, or that they were planning to do more so in the future, kind of being mindful of the potential for disasters. And so some of what you've seen here is probably not too surprising, but I think we could also translate these into items that we could evaluate through the course of efficiency and continuous improvement planning. So a big one, it was actually going ahead and doing all of the preventative maintenance and proper load testing of backup generators, as well as increasing fuel storage for generators, as many of them ran out of fuel within a short amount of time. Now, there's obviously some downsides to increasing on-site fuel storage from sort of safety and other perspectives. And so in the coming years, battery storage and elimination of diesel generators is something to keep an eye on. Microsoft just announced actually a couple weeks ago that for their data center fleet, they're going to be moving away from diesel generators. They of course take backup generation very seriously because of the need to avoid outages at all costs. And so some of those companies are sort of at the vanguard of driving innovation around backup power technology. Other items on the list, getting the MEP equipment out of the basement, or at least up off the floor of the basement, was cited as something that was being incorporated into future planning. I thought this one was interesting, modifying facilities to provide critical community services during severe weather. So not just thinking about the physical building as well, but the building's role in a community-based response that could deliver community services in the aftermath. This kind of hits at the idea of the social infrastructure that Eric Klinenberg's book discusses about how communities and people can be safe in these events based on a combination of physical assets, and social infrastructure. Other things of note, designing for improved comfort during long power interruption. This really just brings us to the idea of passive survivability or passive design, where natural ventilation, natural lighting solutions are either integral to the building function or an option that can be leveraged in these events. Solar, on-site solar generation with a grid disconnect for emergency backup is something that certain facilities were contemplating. There's a lot of policy and legislative kind of aspects of this being a viable solution. And so I expect that some regions will have a difficult time leveraging this type of technique based on how utilities and other lobbyists are influencing regulation around interconnection and grid disconnect opportunities. And then lastly, a majority of the executives were planning for introducing distributed generation through combined heat and power or microgrids. So again, I really wish there was a retrospective to see how many of these ideas were followed through, were funded, were implemented, but maybe that's an examination for another day. So lastly, sharing some of the tools and techniques that myself and my colleagues have started using to introduce resiliency into an efficiency planning process. The first thing that we've been trying to do more of is using desktop tools for integrating high-level risk characterization into any kind of facility assessment or facility improvement planning analysis. There are a number of tools out there that I've used and that are on the horizon. I'm sure there are many more of these, and if folks know of good ones, if you could chat them out so that we all are increasing our library of tools, that would be much appreciated. The first one I already mentioned, the flood factor database, where you can enter various addresses to get a quick snapshot of flood risk according to their methodology. The next one that we use, which is more helpful when you're doing an international real estate portfolio analysis, is WRI's Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas, which at a country and regional level will do a high-level characterization of different water-related risks, not just the potential of flooding, but also water scarcity and water quality issues. And then lastly, one that's being piloted now, but I'm excited about and will be keeping an eye on, is City Tech and a variety of partners, including the City of Chicago, are working to launch a new database tool related to urban heat islands, so that you can kind of as a city planner or a facility evaluator can understand where hotspots of urban heat island exist within your location. Tree cover is known to be not equitably distributed across communities. And so there's an amplifier effect for extreme heat events in neighborhoods that don't have a lot of shading or impervious surfaces. And so tools like this can really help refine an assessment of what the risk at the facility level actually looks like, and therefore what some of the interventions might be. Next up, if you're already going on site to do an energy efficiency, a water efficiency audit, I say why not sneak in a little extra resiliency analysis. And we've had some luck kind of getting different clients that we work with to be game for doing this kind of small add-on exercise, where for maybe a small additional increase in the analysis costs of 3 or 5%, you can get into some of the first layers of analysis necessary for resiliency planning. So this is an example of a water assessment we did a few years ago for hospitality and gaming property in Las Vegas. And we were doing a regular, well, you know, a regular, I will say in quotes, water efficiency assessment. And we did these added exercises of really digging in on the water-related risks that were facing the facility and translated them into fairly pragmatic initiatives similar to water conservation measures that the facility team could integrate into their planning, including having a water demand response program so that if they were in a situation where they had to start kind of cutting either their peak water demand or just shaving water load because of restrictions, that they would have a sense of how they were going to do it and the monitoring and other tools they would need to kind of shut down those discretionary loads. Other approach adjustments that, in my experience, can kind of fit into a more conventional property assessment for energy efficiency are to just do the awareness step of tagging which common low or no cost ECMs actually have resiliency benefits. And, you know, those will be, as we've sort of covered, things that increase ability to do load shifting, that kind of introduce or reintroduce certain passive functions of natural ventilation and natural lighting, as well as just reducing the loads that would be critical to have served by backup generation so that that on-site fuel lasts longer through an event. Beyond that, I think a new best practice that I'm seeing more and more is calculating payback periods and efficiency gains over time in a way that takes into account future state weather instead of the standard weather packages or the backwards looking degree days, as well as planned rate escalations into the payback counts. Especially for water, municipalities oftentimes publicize their plans for rate escalations because they have large infrastructure projects or other reasons. But many facility managers don't seem aware of these planned rate escalations. And so in their annual budgeting process, they just take last year's water utility costs and carry them forward into the next year. But in reality, a lot of places have seen a pretty substantial increase in rates, Chicago included, which has almost quadrupled in the last 10 plus years. And integrating those into the payback calcs can quickly change ROIs from unattractive to reasonable. And then finally, proactively explore with clients if they can tolerate different payback criteria when the measures have a combination of efficiency and resiliency outcomes. And then lastly, there is a kind of upswing in consulting and analysis studies that are being funded over time. You see almost gearing up for exponential growth in expenditures related to risk assessments and analysis, as well as adaptation and resilience planning. So I think there is a big opportunity within energy efficiency practitioners to increasingly introduce building owners and facility managers to the idea of a combined efficiency and resilience assessment. And then we'll end on some resources that I've found helpful beyond those that we covered in the presentation to check out. Again, I'm sure there are many others out there and would welcome chatted suggestions of other options folks should take a look at. But with that, that's my, my presentation for this evening. And I'm not sure what the the normal kind of protocol is for Q&A, but if anyone wants to tee up questions, happy to jump in.
Jenny, thanks so much for your presentation. This is Emily with USGBC. I'm going to facilitate Q&A if folks want to put their questions in the chat. That would be great.
Sounds good.
And I don't see any coming in just yet, so I have a couple that I had thought of during the course of your presentation. One is, as you are incorporating resiliency measures with energy efficiency measures, are you finding that there are increased funding opportunities or increased financing opportunities for implementing those things in the buildings?
Yeah, great question. And this is definitely like an evolving space, and there's lots of folks that are particularly tuned into the financing side of resiliency planning. A local kind of colleague that I work with occasionally as a subcontractor is Joyce Coffey, who's a national expert in resiliency financing. She's a great kind of Midwestern resource and has a lot of resources on her website. And it's really, there are entities that have established, dedicated green bond funds that are aligned with resiliency investments and so on. So I think at a meta level, there is a lot of shifts that's happening on the investor and capitalization side around resiliency. But in terms of, right now there being like amazing incentive programs or go to pockets of money for capital, I have not seen that. Maybe other folks have, but in Chicago anyways, a lot of efficiency planning is still really driven by the utility incentive programs that are ratepayer funded through legislation, but ComEd, the utility, is the administrator. And so they might be starting to kind of like head into a more expansive efficiency plus resiliency mindset, but they're still very oriented towards KWH, reductions without necessarily layering in other metrics into their incentive programs.
Got it. Thanks for that. On a related note to financing, I've heard that maybe in Florida they allow resiliency measures to be covered by PACE, by Property Assessed Clean Energy. I'm just curious if that's something that you've seen used.
Yeah, and I think this is a likely trend, I hope, is that sort of the PACE programs, they take shape on a very kind of regional and localized basis. So how quickly it hits any of the cities and states where most of us do a lot of work is a big question mark. But I do think that that the PACE model, in which kind of lending supports property investments and then is paid back over time as like essentially a special taxation that transfers with building ownership, I think is very promising because for resiliency, because it's not as easy to quantify savings related to resiliency in the form of avoided costs from a disaster, right? It's not as easy to project a payback in the same way as an efficiency measure that has a operating cost reduction. And so I think some of those long-term financing mechanisms that transfer pretty readily with ownership shifts are going to be very important when it comes to kind of saying yes to measures that wouldn't be viable based on their energy benefits alone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes makes a lot of sense. I think in Missouri, obviously we have PACE in Missouri, and there are several programs available to people, but I'm pretty sure that resiliency measures are not part of our PACE program at this point. We would have to open up that legislation at the state level. So
yeah, maybe you're up for it now that you have some recent policy victories under your belt and you're looking for something new to tackle.
Yes, right, in all my spare time. So we've got a couple questions that came into the chat. One is, what types of clients are asking for resiliency assessments? Are they government agencies, private, commercial buildings?
Yeah, so where I'm seeing it the most is entities. So there's some new kind of organizational level climate risk reporting frameworks, including TCFD and also investor-driven initiatives where major real estate investors are really asking for any of their funds needing a much kind of more robust disclosure of ESG, environmental, social governance indicators across their real estate portfolio. And then expecting asset managers and facility managers to have a real deal plan for continuous improvement. And so those are driving some action in certain realms on the sort of large corporations with a significant real estate portfolio are digging into this. So if you think of, Fortune 100 companies that have a lot of real estate, they're the ones that are kind of, I think, at the leading edge. But then also, any commercial buildings that are held by like a real estate investment trust that are subject to these kind of new investor expectations are also moving down this path. But even in those cases, I would say you don't have to wait until somebody asks for it. You can, in sort of useful but not big lift ways, start sneaking it into the mix, which is what I've been doing. And it's, it's been interesting because you have to figure out ways to be pragmatic. If clients aren't asking for it yet, how can you take that step to at least driving some awareness? And I do think there are some ways to introduce it that doesn't necessarily have to really change a project budget.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple questions about insurance that popped up. It seems that the insurance industry might be interested in reducing their risk. So are we seeing that industry doing anything to help offset the improvement costs or recognize resiliency efforts in the form of rate reduction or credit or different things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Insurance is not my specialty, so I won't be able to speak to it as well as other folks may be. But when things like the flood factor database came out, an immediate reaction from a lot of kind of property owners and managers that I know was a lot of anxiety about what it would mean for their insurance rates and for their asset value. And so whether insurance companies start offering kind of bonus programs or if they just start jacking up coverage premiums, I think you'll probably see a mix and it'll play out over time. But for the building owners themselves, I think one way or another, they're anticipating the potential that they need to either invest in resiliency to maintain insurability at acceptable rates or kind of tap into other sources of financing. At least for a lot of Class A commercial real estate, it's not that, and this may not hold true during pandemic times, but it's not the case that they don't have enough capital to invest in their assets. In many cases, it's that they prioritized other things because the return on investment for like a lobby renovation with improved tenant velocity and lease transaction, that might be giving way now in this scenario to actually prioritizing resiliency and efficiency projects. So I think at a minimum, getting companies, real estate companies that have capital to shift how they're using it could be a near-term outcome.
Great, thank you. I don't know if Richard Schussler from our board I think he's on the call. He works for an insurance company. If he wants to weigh in on that question as well.
Yeah.
I'll call you out there.
No, it's all right. Yeah, pretty similar to what Jenny just said. It's more insurability. It's probably more stick than carrot, to where you're going to see, where you might have had flood insurance included in your property insurance program in the past, to where you're seeing reduced limits, or underwriters are withdrawing that coverage from your policies and making you go through the National Flood Insurance Program, which is backed by FEMA and the federal government, and has limitations on what it covers and how much it covers. So, insurance probably isn't going to be a carrot. Now, at a kind of a global level, there's support around resiliency just from a profitability standpoint and sustainability, but when it kind of comes down to individual policies, you're not seeing that kind of incentives. Now, some carriers, encourage disaster response plans, things like that, but a lot of resiliency efforts might be a result of trying to save a few dollars in premiums with an underwriter, or maintain certain levels of insurance as capacity kind of shrinks and pricing goes up.
Thanks, Richard, for the follow-up. Appreciate that. So there's another question in here related to that ECMs, or energy conservation measures, are a key to planning for resiliency, but what other kinds of trends are you seeing in the market related to resiliency? Are there urban gardening or transit planning, other kinds of things that people are looking at?
Yeah, definitely big systems transformation around agriculture and supply chain and transportation too. I will say that the current situation with COVID-19 has been an interesting stress test of the sort of forward-looking direction of resiliency, particularly when it comes to transportation, because a lot of cities already were having issues kind of funding transit investments, and the revenue hit that they are taking right now because commuters are not using those systems is going to be difficult to overcome without federal assistance to really get at the place where there can be transformation towards electrification and regional transit infrastructure and so on. So fingers crossed that this is just a blip on the radar of kind of a lot of resilience transformation in transportation infrastructure. But I feel like of all of the system changes that have been eyed via resiliency, that's the one that is maybe going to be most impacted by the current situation. Food systems and supply chains, I think it's likely to get a boost to kind of have distributed agricultural resources and sort of shorter and more local and regionalized supply chains from the current situation.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen, locally, and probably a lot of others have as well, a real boost to the local food system, and people really clamoring to have access to local farmers and fresh food. And obviously all the gardening supplies stores are like sold out of everything. So Yeah,
Yeah, save your seeds this year.
exactly.
Maybe
It's a
you have
good,
some open pollinated options in your gardens.
right. I just let everything that sprouts in my compost bin grow. So I'm doing pretty good with some cherry tomatoes there. So let's see, we've got, you had mentioned an article earlier, that a particular article, and it may, or maybe a study that someone is asking about. Is there an easy way to access that, or can we use
Yeah,
the
I
link
don't
to
know if
share?
it's easy. It was
Oh, wait.
it's from a collaboration including Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So maybe there's a way to eventually get free access to it. I had to pay 35 bucks on Elsevier. But if you have access to the Building and Environment Journal, or you go to like Science Direct and you can purchase access there if you don't have it through an institution.
Great. Yeah, Tom just put in the chat that you can look at Building and Environment Volume 177. And that is where that article lives. So Richard, I think if you can find it that way.
Yeah, and it's brand new. So I look forward to being there, kind of reactions from energy simulation specialists and kind of increased application of those types of models to get a sense of which ECMs are going to match which weather scenarios and kind of extreme event scenarios.
Deal. Other questions for Jenny, if you want to put them in the chat? Have a few more minutes left. We have, let's see, Hope shared the Elsevier link too for that same article. So I will just start wrapping up that, let's see, that Jenny will be with us again next week for an in-depth session on August 18th from 3 to 5 on BIT building case studies. And BIT is a program, a building performance improvement program for existing buildings that encourages the adoption of high performance best practices. And Jenny's a co-founder of that BIT building program. So you are all welcome to join that session at a discounted rate if you use the discount code August, which is in the chat, and she'll talk about some different operations and maintenance best practices covered by the BIT building framework. I definitely encourage people to consider that. I have a couple closing remarks before we wrap up. And just want to thank Jenny for her presentation this evening. I really learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing how we can incorporate more resiliency into the energy efficiency work happening locally. I want to thank ASHRAE for being part of our program this evening. And thanks to our sponsor, CXE Group. I think they've sponsored this joint program with ASHRAE for as long as we've done it, which is, I think, probably 10 or more years now, which is pretty awesome. And just encourage people to take a look at the program that Jenny will be presenting next week and check out our website for other upcoming events. Hopefully we'll see you next month on September 8th for our town hall meeting with USGBC's president and CEO, Mahesh Ramanujan. And Erin, do you have any closing remarks from ASHRAE?
Nothing except for standby for announcements for September and October meetings. You should be receiving a September meeting announcement and invite in the next couple of weeks.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. Have a great rest of your evening, and hopefully at some point in the future we'll be able to meet in person again and bring Jenny here to do a in-person presentation. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.